Welcome back to Change the Odds, the podcast where marriage and family were never meant to be a game of chance. My name is Kevin Thompson. Last week on the podcast, we looked at part one of what it means to be engaged as couples, as individuals, families. What does it mean to fixate on those things that matter the absolute most and to let go of all the distractions that are around us? Well, this week, we're going to pick up the second part of what that teaching looks like. So enjoy right now.
So I think one of the things that distracts us, one of the things that keeps us from being engaged now is just the noise that is around us. So Ella, my 19-year-old, has Down syndrome. And so part of Down syndrome is it's a triplicate of the 21st chromosome. So every cell in her body, the 21st chromosome, instead of having 2 copies, it actually has 3 copies. And one of the ways very early on that Down syndrome was explained to me was it's almost as though each cell of her body has so much information in it, so much noise kind of coming out of it that the body can't keep up. In much the same way that there is a limit to the amount of noise that can come out of these speakers. If you doubt that, we test it every weekend. And so if you maximize the amount of noise that can come out of these speakers, everything gets distorted. You lose the clarity. And so one of the ways that Down syndrome was explained to me early on when Ella was first born is the cells lack the clarity to do what they're supposed to do. And so her muscle tone is lower, her tongue is going to be larger, her eyes are going to be shaped different, all those different kind of things. Every cell of her body now just has a little bit too much going on, and it just distorts the way things are supposed to be. I think in many ways, specifically in the day in which we live, there is so much noise that we lose a sense of clarity. Things just kind of get now distorted in some way. And so in order for us to engage the fullness of who we are and the fullness of who God is and the fullness of what this world is, I think there has to be this very intentional disconnection in order for us to allow quiet to take place so that we can then actually properly engage. It could be that one of the reasons we struggle with engagement is because we never actually disengage. And ironically, in an almost contrarian kind of way, the way to engage is actually to disengage first. That way you can re-enter into the way that you're actually supposed to be. Whereas if you just stay in everything all the time, you'll begin to drift into places that you and I should not actually be. It should be one of the elements, I think, of corporate worship. One of the hopes should be that we have the discipline of every single weekend, gathering together as a body of believers, hopefully also gathering together in some form of a small group to disengage from the normal routine of our lives so that we can remind ourselves of what the big picture really is all about, of what really is important. And then that way, whenever we step back in, we have the actual mindset that we're supposed to have. I would hope that that's one of the great benefits of what's going on a big Wednesday and marriage ministry and whatever your small group does, whatever it looks like, is it just kind of reminds you what's important. Let's face it, in all the times that we have spent together now in these 3 years, I have in all likelihood never said anything that profound, but I've said a lot of true stuff. And a lot of true stuff that you've already known, you've just forgotten. A lot of true stuff that whenever you heard it, you felt a little prick of conviction. You're like, yeah, I need to do that. I need to change this. This is not like rocket science. Marriage itself, life itself, relationships themselves, I get that they're complicated at times, but I think they are far more simple than we like to admit. I got a call tonight. There's a lot of things going on in this moment, which I'm so grateful for. There's probably 80 people upstairs right now in the B building who normally would be in this room with us, and they're in the blended family life stage, creating that life stage and learning some tools and techniques of what it means to blend a family together. I'm so grateful for what's going on up there. Grief shares taking place, financial peace, all these things are happening. But over at Venture, they have a class that's working through our new guidebook that goes along with friends, partners, and lovers. And I was just backstage talking to my coworker who's leading that over there to try to help him through some of the survey results and how to teach that class in the best way possible. And he said, Kevin, hey, listen, I got a couple in here who's been married 26 years, who've been through some very difficult times, some very rough times. They said they have spent, in all likelihood, between $10,000 and $15,000 on counseling. And they said that the past 5 weeks of this class have been more transformative in their marriage than any of the counseling that they've ever done. And I said, I bank at Armstrong Bank in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And I do not charge $400 an hour. I will, for the flat fee of $200 an hour, happily take that in. But what is it that's going through that guidebook? What has been the big thing? Nothing. Because one thing that he said, Kevin, this thing is so simple. And marriage is not just a set of bullet points, but these bullet points are so simple that people can actually do them. You see, life is complicated, and I get that. But there's another side that says life is pretty simple. And if you and I can begin to see the simple way, in the midst of the complexity, to begin to hone in, to zero in, to be able to hear the voice that truly matters, first and foremost. And then to begin to give attention to the things that truly matters. The complexity begins to strip away, because let's face it, a great deal of the complexity are of things that don't matter. We have kind of a family friend who's a football coach, and he's done very well. At one time, he was kind of known as one of the greatest offensive minds in college football, but those are passing moments by all means. But one thing that I've heard him say before is, Kevin, my offensive scheme is as simple as it can be. It's as old school as it can be. It's the same old plays, with a bunch of window dressing. And so I send this person in motion, I line up in this different way, I do this different thing, but in the end, I'm handing the ball to the running back and I'm telling him to run through the A gap. But they get so caught up by everything else that is going on, they fail to cover the very thing that is the most obvious play I can run. I think that's what's going on in our world today. That there is so much noise around us that it's almost like we don't know what voice to listen to. Think about that. We've probably said that among us. Well, we just don't know who to listen to. What about Jesus? What would that be like? What if it really didn't matter so much, whatever other news organizations are saying? What if we have to discern those things, no doubt. But what if we just on a consistent basis, just to begin to hear the voice of Jesus, just on a regular basis? Is it possible that some of the complexity of this world is almost a self-induced complexity, that if we were honest with ourselves, we are actually leveraging as an excuse for our apathy? And saying, well, it's just so complex, there's just nothing I can do about it. So that we actually don't have to have any transformation of our own heart. So we actually don't have to engage and risk and possibly fail and possibly struggle. And so we really don't have to have faith and depend upon God. Is it conceivable that some of the things that we think are just the realities of this world are actually now our excuses for our own disobedience? And what would it look like if we just begin to pay a little bit more attention, give a little bit more of an ear, fixate a little bit more on Jesus, a little bit more on the things that matter, our families and our kids, and the task that God has placed before us, the challenge of what it means to love our neighbors, to love our enemies in this community, and just begin to pay a little less attention to whatever the cultural war of the day is, whatever the strife of the moment is, whatever the rumor of the culture is. And what would it look like? Remember the image that we had last week of the eye of the hurricane, that as the cultural winds just whip all around us, just with absolute destruction, if we just had this ability to enter into our relationship with God and have a calmness and a peace that is going to cause people to look at us and say, either they know God or they are a serial killer. Because who can live that way? And I would love to have people look at me with that kind of intrigue. Instead of just looking at me as though, well, he's no different than our culture. So let's just kind of walk through a little bit of this real fast. It's nothing that life-changing. But notice this. This is not in your book, so already I'm not paying attention to what I've written. Study was done of a group of 85-year-olds. What are the 3 most likely signs that they're going to live one more year? Right? If you're 85 in the room, my apologies for this illustration. But the average life stage is 78, right? So you're already on the other side of statistics. Interesting thing. The story was publicized primarily to highlight the 3rd leading indicator, and that is a flu shot. That taking a flu shot is actually more effective than diet, than exercise, in predicting whether or not you're going to live. Now, I wonder if in part of that is just actually not causation, but correlation. I wonder if taking a flu shot is just a sign that you're actually getting good health care. And so maybe that's what saves you. These are the things I think about whenever I read stories like this and some reporter is telling me, here's the cause. I'm like, maybe not. Okay. Number 1 doesn't surprise us. Number 1, it is how much interaction do you have with friends and family? Obvious. But you know what the second one was? This shocked me. The second one was, how many weekly casual interactions do you have with human beings? The second greatest indicator that an 85-year-old will live at least one more year is the number of actual physical interactions that person has with real people. Now, what does that have to do with noise? It's this. Technology is a beautiful thing. There is such an opportunity that now comes with it. But you and I have to wisely begin to watch and distinguish that even as we can leverage it for good things, even as Jenny and I can keep an ongoing conversation taking place throughout our day, hypothetically, while she's in the stands and I'm sitting here right now, even though it can connect us, at the exact same time, technology can separate us, and it happens so subtly that we don't even recognize that it's happening. And so whenever I was a little boy, before all this technology came into being, my dad, you've heard me tell the story, we'd pull up to the bank, and my dad would say, Kevin, you always go into the bank. You never go through the drive-thru. And I was like, Dad, that is so inconvenient. Just go through the drive-thru. No. He said, Kevin, a day comes in which you need your banker to know your face and you need to know theirs. And so it is worth the time, it is worth the inconvenience of regularly going in to build that relationship so that in that moment of need, you know who to call, they recognize your voice, they know everything that's going on. There is a wisdom in that, not just in that, but there's a wisdom in a modern day application to that I think you and I need to pick up. We live in a day in which technology is so removing human interaction that one of the ways to calm the noise in our lives is to intentionally seek out human interaction rather than computer interaction. This is going to happen. We're going to interact and we should leverage technology for all that it's worth. There's no question. But what would happen if we begin to actually seek out that whenever we have a choice, and I get that this is different for different people. And so, look, I'm an introvert. Y'all know that. And so after I've had all of you that I want, it's okay if on the way home, if I need to run by Walmart, it's okay for me to, because we do Walmart. Because that's Arkansas. Okay, so it's okay for me to go to the self-checkout and just have some peace so I actually don't have to have human interaction, right? But for some of you, and then for me at other times, when maybe I've gone my day off, maybe I haven't had a lot of interaction, I need to be intentional to inconvenience myself to actually see a person and interact with them, because you and I were created for connection with other human beings. We were not created just to run everything through technology. And it could be that there's a lot of ways that we're actually adding noise to our lives because we are craving this human interaction that we are stripping ourselves of on a daily basis in these casual ways. And we're deceiving ourselves into thinking that, okay, interaction on social media here is the same as interacting in person, and it's really not. And is it possible that one of the reasons that we are so afraid of silence, and one of the reasons that we are endlessly scrolling and endlessly interacting and afraid that we're going to miss out on something, is actually just a natural consequence of when you and I stop spending so much time in physical proximity and interaction with one another? And so what would it look like if we, first of all, recognize what technology is doing, and then make sure we're leveraging it where we can, but being very intentional to step outside and to actually interact humanly? Notice an aspect that I talk about here on the bottom of page 35, beginning of verse. Now, this has gone from AI created to given by the very hands of God. Inspired. This is just full of Arkansas intelligence is all this is. It's not artificial. But the connection between noise and listening. Here's what happens when you and I are constantly surrounded by noise. For our own well-being, we have to learn to drown things out. And when you and I train our brain to drown out the noise around us, unintentionally what gets drowned out is the voices of those who matter the most. And we don't even recognize it. It's one of the things that we talk about in married life all the time. How often do you actually listen to your spouse? I wasn't even a joke, but found it funny. But if we're not very careful, we can grow just so accustomed to each other and so assuming that we already know what the other thinks and is going to say, that even if we ask the question, which many times we don't actually pay attention to the answer because we just assume we already know. And there's so many things going on around us. Our brain can only focus on so many things. What would it be like if we actually begin to listen? And notice now the connection between listening, which leads to connection, and connection leads to compassion. So if you and I are not listening, we are not connecting. And so if you and I go to lunch, if we go to coffee, if we do whatever it is that we're going to do, and if your phone comes out and now you're paying attention to this, I just assume that you've stopped paying attention to me. And as you have stopped listening, we have stopped connecting. But notice, it's not just that it stops there. It's that connection actually leads to compassion. Here's what I can almost bet about every single person in this room who's been here for a while. You now notice people with Down syndrome more than you did before. Why? Because of Ella. We're connected. And that connection breeds compassion. How many of you texted me when Arkansas beat Tennessee? Ray now calls me during Arkansas games. And he's on Dish, I'm on YouTube TV, which means he's 30 seconds ahead of me, and he doesn't know it. And I haven't told him. And so literally he's watching the game, and I'm trying to hear what's happening to predict what's going to happen. And he said at one point, "Why am I watching Arkansas?" It's because he loves me. And that connection leads to compassion. But you and I can't have connection unless we're listening. What would it look like if you and I begin to intentionally listen to other people? It would breed connection, which would lead to compassion. Is it possible that what we're experiencing in this country right now with this divisiveness, is it possible that the main reason that has happened is because we have stopped listening to each other? So we have no connection, which then empowers us to look at the other side, whatever the other side is for you, as evil instead of with compassion. I can't tell you how many times I've seen on social media somebody will take an opinion of the other side, will post it, and mockingly ask the question, how could anybody believe this? And so often I look at that and I think to myself, well, just Google it. And you'll begin to see how somebody comes to that conclusion. Even if you disagree, at least you can say, oh, well, here's why they believe that. Silas is in a debate class right now, which I absolutely love. And what I keep on telling him is, hey, if you're given the choice, if you have to debate something, always choose the side that you don't believe in. And I said, because here's the thing. If you can debate the other side of it, first of all, you will fully know what you believe in. And it will give you at least some insight and compassion to those that disagree with you, which will actually give you more influence with them. Years ago back in Arkansas, we preached a series on just different religions as compared to Christianity. And so in the preparation for that series, in contrast to what we believe as evangelical, Protestant evangelicals, and so we looked at Mormonism one week, we looked at Catholicism, we looked at atheism, agnosticism, we looked at Islam, we looked at all these things. And what I told our guys in preparation for it is, okay, if you get assigned that sermon, you have to write it, and then after you write it, you have to go visit with a religious leader or a leader in that field, give it to them, let them read it, and at the end, they have to be willing to say, yeah, I agree with what you say I believe. Because what I didn't want to do was this cheap kind of knockoff series in which I'm saying, oh, well, here's what they believe, and it's not even what they believe. And so I took Catholicism, and so I went to Father Kevin in town, and I said, hey, here's my sermon for Sunday. Will you read it? And is there anything that I say you believe that you don't actually believe? And we read through some stuff, and he goes, hey, this one point here, that's not quite the point. Okay, well, what's the point? Let's change it. Okay, so we changed it. We got everything. All right, at the end, do you believe everything I just said you believe? He said, yeah. I said, okay, and that's where we disagreed. He said, yeah, absolutely. And then that's what I preached. That is a thoughtful, kind, compassionate way to actually deal with people who disagree with you. And it all began with listening, which led to connection, which then actually breeds compassion. The danger of the noise in our culture is that you and I will stop listening because there's just so much. What would it look like? You can't have it all, you can't be it all, you can't do it all. You can't hear it all. What if you became selective in what you heard? And then begin to say, all right, what are the things that are most important for me to hear? The voice of God? The voice of Jenny? Yeah, for all of you. The voice of Jenny for every single one of you. It's Jesus and Jenny. The voice of my kids, the voice of our neighbors, the voice of our friends, these voices. And what if in order to hear those, that's gonna require us to begin to intentionally step away from or step out of some of these other noises that just don't really matter. Imagine this. We'll do Q&A next time. Text marriage to 56316. I'll look at it later tonight. Imagine this. Imagine if 1 year from now, we are in this room, which is likely for many of us. Only if you have secondary connections if you're over 85. But that is so, oh, that is so funny. And over this year, you have intentionally kind of disengaged from a few things in order for you to better hear from God and from those that you love the most. Is there any way that a year from now you would look back on that with regret? No. And so, you can't have it all. You can't be it all. You can't do it all. but you can be human. And who were humans created to listen to? God and each other. Let's do that, and I'll see you next week.